Are we waiting on something? All right, now we're good, okay. All right, this is our budget meeting. Y'all may not even be able to hear me, so. I've given you some different scenarios on various police, EMT, fire, public works. Also got you another projection on just estimated, we're kind of estimating on revenue loss. We don't know for sure.
Yeah, I don't have any of that.
Yeah, I don't have it.
Okay. Lonnie, I guess.
You gonna read that whole thing tonight?
There's 9 copies there, I believe,
that's
for
ordinance.
everyone.
Yes.
That whole thing?
Yep.
Several of them.
We always do.
Don't we have a Reader's Digest?
We will.
Spell in a little bit. Take turns reading a couple of pages.
There we go.
And then these,
You want me to pass this down? To you and Bob? Yeah.
I think that's all of them.
And you have your own set? You're good?
All right, Lonnie, you want to, we got one more?
Is this,
2 more.
what did I say, is this it?
That's the same thing, I
There are
think.
4 pieces of, there are 4 different chunks of information.
That was 1E. Trying to one.
Okay.
You have one? Oh, here, there's 2 in there.
All right.
And there's another.
So there's 4?
Street.
Right.
4, I think, is what you have. I couldn't print the entire workbook that I used, so I may produce it and send it to you, so that you can get a better visual of the entire city budget. But what I have done for you here is you'll find a sheet that says, looks something like this. It'll be the first page, and it'll be revenues. And so what I did, I took the last quarterly budget report that we had for March, and I started and if everything from the center to the left is exactly the same. And then I started looking at what our revenue scenarios might be like, and so the first column past the center, at the top you'll see 70%. Okay, that's anticipating that we will get from now until the end of the year, in the other 3 quarters, 70% of the revenue that we had remaining from our budgeted first quarter. And then the next column is the difference. The next column, I went to 60% and the difference, and then 50%. So 3 different scenarios on what our revenues might look like, and of course this is just a projection.
So that, for instance, the first number under 70%, that's 16,834. That's 70% of, what, the 24,000?
The available balance is what we had left from what was budgeted
Right.
at the end of the quarter.
So these percentages are off that last.
That's correct.
Gotcha.
And of course, there are a few of them that will probably get, I think we'll get 100% on. So I didn't apply the 70%, and I eliminated some like the sidewalk repair and the rehab over on the second page at $10,000. I included at full 100% the reimbursement from our contract with Western Carroll County Ambulance District of $260,000. So you can't exactly take every line or the totals and apply the 70, 60, and 50% because I went line item by line item to get to the totals on these. So you can see on the bottom what the revenue picture would look like at 70%. It would be and this is until the end of the year, $2,612,491.67. For 60% would be $2,340,143. And at 50%, it would be $2,067,709.20.
That's your shortfall, correct?
That's what we will receive. The shortfall would be the difference in between.
70%, 50% of it projected.
Okay.
That's what they are.
Kim, are you hearing me okay up there?
Nikki, are you hearing okay?
Jim's not over.
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Good, thanks.
Watching it on the TV all
But at any rate, this is just a stab at trying to determine 3 different levels that we might be looking at. I think we'll have to monitor it very carefully because our, the disaster was really declared on March the 13th, and we were really going good on our sales tax up through our February report, or April report actually. And so we don't have it yet for this month. We'll get it around the 20th. We'll be able to see, I think, what the last half of March is going to do for us, and then go from there. And of course, June will probably be really bad because it'll be the sales that we had here in the city in April. So I'm not expecting it to be really too good. But at any rate, and if we monitor this very carefully monthly, I think we can maybe make our adjustments as we go, or at least every 2 months, because our sales tax are kind of 2 months behind. So at any rate, that's what I did on the revenue side. So I don't know, you should have, you have fire and EMS?
Yeah.
Okay, I applied the same. I'm sorry?
I'll go get Nick.
Oh, if you want to bring Nick up, you sure. I applied the same scenario. To the left is what the budget actually was at the end of the quarter, or what we had, what we'd spent, and then I applied the 60, or the 70, 60, and 50 to the expenses. So you can kind of see where that falls in the scenario.
Correct me if I'm wrong, Lonnie, but like you said, we had the contract for the EMS on the Western District, so we get that money. I mean,
That's included in the revenue side,
yes.
100%.
Right.
And say there are expenses that I had to include at 100%, or what was remaining, because, for instance, insurance, we don't have any control over, utilities and that sort of thing. So we can't take 70% across the board. So this is a line item by line item by line item by line item analysis.
And I imagine we're gonna save some fuel.
Probably.
Don't hear the sirens as much as we used to, you know, so
I'm sorry?
don't hear the sirens.
Well, and of course, we're dealing with a lower fuel cost now than we were when we did the budgets. And so,
We're averaging higher cost, higher runs than what we had in the past. You may not be hearing them, but I believe from what I'm hearing from Nick, we've got a little bit higher ambulance costs.
but anyway, this is just a projection. If this is where we end up, I think we can make adjustments as we move along, as we monitor the revenues, but as I said before, we have no control over the revenues. The only thing we have control over are the expenses, and we have, some control over that, but not everything. Yes, ma'am.
I guess, and I understand maybe your system doesn't allow you to put this together in a better format as opposed to printing each one of these out. Do you have a total on the 70%, the 60, and 50 on all of these combined? Do you know how much we have as a shortfall if we were to go at 70, 60?
I have it on my computer downstairs, but I don't have it printed off for you because I've tried to print the entire workbook.
Yeah.
Because what I did, I copied the budget report that you had last time and over into an Excel spreadsheet or workbook, and that's what I've been working with. I thought it was probably a good place to start because the first quarter we don't have any control over, it's history, so we go from here until the end of the year, and that's what I was saying when I first. I'm going to try to reformat this to some degree and take out some of these columns and email it to you. And but I couldn't get it printed where you could read it.
So I just need to add these up and see.
Well, if you want to wait on I'll have you the email with the attachment probably tomorrow or Wednesday or Thursday.
Okay. Well, I mean, I thought we were talking budget tonight, so I'd rather add them up tonight and at least have a number
Well, you
so
won't.
that
Okay.
we can have that discussion. Otherwise, we're just getting information and waiting for you to provide us with
Well,
more.
this is still the budget, this is per department, so
No, I
this is what
understand, but I kind of wanted, I will just add these up on my own and see what the numbers are.
Well,
rather than-
let me tell you, you won't have all of the departments because some of them, like, even though I cut mine, it's not a major department. I just printed the major departments for
Same
you.
thing with the mayor's office, Lonnie's,
And the court and some of the other smaller ones I just printed the major ones for you tonight. So if you add them up, you're not going to get the true total that I have in the worksheet, in the workbook.
So what's your bottom line recommendation right now?
What is my bottom line recommendation?
Right, because as far as I know, we haven't had much in the way of cuts.
Well, I think if you'll look at these, there'll be some fairly substantial cuts that you'll see. Yes, sir.
My question is this. Nick is here, so this is a good thing to go on right now. I've got the fire department in front of him. So, you've got on paper, just, line by line, cut 70, 60, 50. But what does that actually do to the department, Nick? I mean, what is your minimum that you have to operate? Can you operate on 50% of what?
No, I can tell you that, it can.
Okay, well, then this is not then that's not practical.
The largest portion of any of these department heads is obviously going to be salary and wages.
Sure.
And cutting we're running minimum staffing right now. We staff 2 full-time ambulances. That's 4 guys per shift.
We're
If
required to do that.
We're contractually, yes, we're contractually obligated to staff 2 ambulances 24/7, 365. 68 times this year, we've had both of those ambulances out on calls and had a third out crew coming in to staff the third truck. 1 2-car accident, 2 vehicles, overwhelms 1 ambulance. They can't transport more than 2 patients in an ambulance. So, it's just one of those things. But yeah, cutting, even furloughing or laying off a couple of my employees greatly affects our ability to provide the quality service that we have.
What Nick has done in your packet, that I've also given you, it's his recommendations on what, I've asked him to give us his maximum that he could comfortably cut.
Yeah, I reduced,
I think that was
Is that-
107,000.
This page.
Yeah,
Where is
The
that?
second page,
No, it's on the far end. No, it should say,
107,000, reduction in budget.
correct.
yeah.
I went through each line item and looked at our percentages and looked at different aspects of our budget that we could pull the purse strings as tight as we can and even make some sacrifices here and there, and cut certain things, and everybody being diligent and knowing that this affects everybody. And if we plan to continue to provide this public service, it's something we're gonna have to do. So we're committed to doing what we can to help out.
Susan?
I guess my questions really would be, it sucks that we're in this situation, right? I mean,
Yeah.
we all admit that, but essential costs, I know you've talked about the ambulance and what you're required to do, is looking at what you've put on here, you've got full-time personnel, 12 full-time personnel reduced from 13 in 2016.
Correct. When I hired on as the fire chief, we did not replace the Monday through Friday 8 to 5 chief that had been here for years previous.
Okay.
So-
I guess what I'm saying is, when I look at a plan, it's, in this situation, it's almost kind of like a disaster recovery plan, right? Because that's what we're in right now. You should have an essential costs, which you know what your essential costs are going to be, what you're required by the state to provide, correct? And then on top of that, for a town of this size, you say, we've got 2,000 plus residents, this is what we're supposed to provide. You also know you have the aspect of tourists coming to town, right?
Correct.
And so that number plays into how many personnel you have. Am I correct in
Well,
doing this?
Historically,
What I'm saying?
back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we staffed 1 ambulance, 24 hours a day, 365. But then we had a restrictive callback that had another crew had to live within 5 minutes of the station to staff that second ambulance, no matter what, all the time. FLSA required that call was too restrictive, and from there we managed to have 2 full-time crews. 2 ambulances is the minimum that we absolutely have
Okay,
to
so I
provide.
guess what I'm asking is, if you know those things, you know exactly what you have, is there a way for you to provide us with some of that information?
Salaries and wages on that line item is exactly that. It's only salaries and wages for those full-time personnel, and then whatever part-time personnel would be required to fill in for vacation days, sick days, that sort of thing.
Okay, going back to my essential costs.
Yeah.
You know how many people you're supposed to have.
Correct.
Right, by law. You also know you've got the added on there of tourism, right? And that's what's been built into this whole program, right? That we have X number of people additionally in town over our residents on a regular basis throughout the year, correct?
Correct.
Okay, so knowing that we won't, I don't want to say won't, knowing that we could possibly not have that same number of tourists in town over the next 3 or 4 months until things get back up and running, what does that do to this?
Not a thing. Tourism plays no part in our staffing. We have to,
Not at all.
we have to have 2 full-time ambulances, whether we have tourists coming to town or not.
Because
If-
of the
if we have
contract
a-
that we're in.
Yeah, if we have a chest pain call in town, and then we have somebody fell down the steps at another location, or 1 2-car wreck, it's just something that has to happen. And our contractual obligations, we bring in, right around 260,000 a year from the Western Carroll County Ambulance District, and then we bring in between 350 and 400,000 in EMS billing reimbursements, and a large, significant portion of that is ambulance calls to Holiday Island.
I'm gonna say that the fire department is the least of our worries, because at least there's some income coming in besides what our sales tax does. Police department is where we're bleeding.
We'll get to the police department.
I mean, I guess I'm just looking at this and,
That is, Susan, what he's presented is what he says is,
yeah.
Has been-
Well, that's what I just wanted to ask,
Yeah.
is to make sure I'm clear and understand
Yes,
exactly what
ma'am.
you're saying. So really, in reality, you've got less than a 10% decrease that you think that you could do.
Yes, ma'am.
It's almost 12, but that's
Well,
11.8. Yeah, because I've pushed him real hard on that too. If we do any more, we're gonna be going, cutting down an ambulance, and then we're actually in violation of our contract.
Right.
Bob, you had a question?
I have a couple of questions. First one, Lonnie, is just for the format. I'm a little, why, I just want to know why you chose to present it this way, because usually, if you say 70% cut or 50% cut, you're looking at the original budget and you're cutting 70%. You're cutting 70% of what was left at the end of May, which makes it very difficult to talk with citizens, because when they hear the word 70% cut, 50% cut, they react the same way that I did. They look at the original budget and they cut by that percentage. What, is this like an accounting method that you cut based on?
Bob, the first quarter is gone, and it is what it is.
Right.
And so what we have left is what we've got to deal with.
Right.
And so this seemed to me, this is not an accounting. I mean, there's a number of ways you could present it, I suppose, but it's not necessarily set in stone. It seemed to me to be the most practical way to present the entire budget. But, if you disagree with that, well, that's certainly your...
I'm just saying that off the top of the surface, when I hear 50% cut, it just goes back to the original.
Well, if we did that,
Modify
what would happen to the first 3 months that we've already, we've already either collected or spent, depending on which side of the equation you're on. So,
he could give us 2 numbers. I mean, it may be modified for the year and it ends up being, 51% as an average for the year. But, I get why you're doing it, because you've got your balances here and
Terry?
My question is,
I have another question.
oh, I'm sorry, Bob.
That's okay, yeah. I was gonna ask Nick, so if I look at his bottom line figure, cutting 50%, it comes up to like $509,000 for your department. And what you're saying is you still need $1,186,412.
Yeah, in my preliminary adjustment that I've tried to revise I started with the beginning budget of what was approved this year.
Okay, so yours is the,
And then I've reduced that amount I looked at the percentage of each line item where we sat at the time that was calculated, and I've reduced the entire amount by 107.
okay.
I went through each line item and looked at where we are right now, and realistically, what could we do over the next 6, 7 months to reduce costs and
So then, your $1,186,412 is a 12-month budget.
Correct.
Okay, so we can't compare the two.
Unless you looked at what that 12-month is and reduced it by what our first quarter has already gone by.
Yeah, right.
But that 107 is going to be reflective of the next, from today on. You're going to take that decrease in that period. It's not over 12
Correct. You can
period,
see which line items I've actually reduced by how many thousands. And it would be, I could sit downstairs with a
Yeah, right.
calculator and figure it out for you.
Susan's right, this is gonna reflect on it
Correct.
from
It's
now on.
for the remainder of the year.
Correct.
It's not a reflection of a 12-month period. It's a reflection of a, what do we say, 9 months?
Well, I would make sure Bob's done. Are you done?
I'm not sure what we're saying now, I'm really confused. If you were coming in to ask for money,
Yes.
would you be asking for the next 9 months, $1,186,412?
No, that's the entire
That's a
12-month
12-month
period.
budget. Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
Okay. I guess what I think we need to do is the way Lonnie's presented it, is that we need to give a directive, I guess, to all the departments that we want a 40% decrease, as an example, which is the middle of the three projections there. And do that, and then have the departments come back with what they can do to get there, if anything. And it looks like Nick's not even gonna get close. So, I mean, is that what this is, Lonnie? Is that what you're presenting here? You're not really presenting any remedies, it's just the numbers that we need to do to get if this is what we want to do.
What I'm trying to do is to give you what the projected revenue would be for the remainder of the year at this particular level.
I understand.
And on the fire department, I think there needs to be a distinction made on the 107,000. 40,000 of that is capital expenditure that Nick cut out. So 62,000 of operations is, and I'm sorry, Nick, I wanted to clarify that 40,000 of that was in for capital vehicles or something. I don't remember now what it was, but anyway, he cut that out. So the 62,000 or whatever is what he's cutting from operations. So
So it's just a cut of 67,000 in reality
That's correct.
for the entire year.
Correct. I went off of what our approved budget was, which included that capital, but we haven't worked on that project yet. That'll be down the line, another year.
So. I mean, I'm really not sure where we are. I don't really know what to do.
Well, I think we need to go through all these other two departments.
I mean, why? They're basically the same thing.
No,
at
they're not.
70, oh, they're not at 70, 60, 50, then?
Actually, the water sewer came down to 70, he's got about a 30% cut. The fire department, ended up being less,
Let me ask you this.
I'm sorry, I mean, the water department is actually figured at a 30% reduction.
Dwayne came back and gave us, and I think it should be, and I don't have it in front of me. I think it ended up being about a 30% decrease.
Just about.
Are we done with Nick, with fire and EMS questions for him?
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
thank you.
I think that
The streets, public works, water and sewer was 33%. and
here's,
street was 30%.
Mayor, here's what Dwayne turned in.
Did you say 33% on the public works?
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's on its way.
And Madam Clerk, here's the police department, if you don't mind. I'm sorry.
No problem. It's been a heck of a day.
Water and sewer, and this is water and sewer. So we have two,
Did you already have one of those, Susan?
In a different form.
is this the
Well-
one that was prepared?
The one that says Drake Springs Public Works in green, on
Yeah.
top, yeah.
This is what Dwayne did.
Okay, that's what I was gonna say, by the department head prepared this one,
Yeah.
correct? Okay.
So basically a 34% reduction.
There's-
Now you're talking, that's,
The police, and again, you can see from Lonnie's,
we haven't got anything on police.
Haven't got any what?
Nothing on the police.
I just gave it to, it should look like this.
oh, you didn't do, here. Okay, that's
Oh, we get a new one?
That's police.
Oh, I'm sorry.
This is what the chief turned in. This is what the chief turned in.
You got extras?
Are you sure?
And then the backside, it says you're got an extra water sewer.
Oh, I'm sorry. But right now we're doing water and sewer, right?
Yeah, let's do water and sewer. Let's one at a time.
We got one. Did you figure that headlight in the budget thing?
We can't afford that light, I don't believe. We'll have to park it during nighttime hours.
All the street repairs you've done as far as the overlays and that's all paid for, we're good, right?
Well, it's calculated into that, my cuts are, what we're looking at there to make that work, but,
But what we have already done is paid for.
no,
Well, it's not paid for.
no, we should have that before long, we're gonna run it. Of course, that's, in that line item, it's covered for that. Within the maintenance, you'll still see quite a bit of money in there, that's why I left that to that degree, because.
5,400?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, we had planned on another round, and of course, that's obviously on hold. And so,
How much of the balance is there?
well, I think, we're talking, that was 140, 60, something like that, was when the bill comes in from Hutchins, that will come out of that line item.
Okay.
But that'll leave enough so I believe we can adequately maintain what we're doing without, any overlays.
What's 5415 or 14?
It's on your,
230? Yeah. 200.
it's on your other sheet.
Walls, 55,
Walls?
We've got a wall on King Street that we're still going to proceed with. It's dangerous, that we've been looking at for a year
There's
or
one on
two.
the low side of the old house that Lee Jenkins.
Yeah. We were hoping to do it last year, and of course, we put it into this year, we got it planned. I don't see how we can back off of that one.
Is the property owner involved in any of that or not?
No, it's kind of holding the street up, and we're gonna repair that, pour it back, and do the sidewalk, and then the plan is, unless it changes, and then we'll face it with the existing rock, we'll pour it and face it. And we've got a small wall up here that we're gonna do, and then, of course, unless, something falls, but that's all we've got planned so far this year on the walls.
Well, this rain.
Is the guy on Ellis Gray ever going to be made to face that one, or?
Well, we put the pressure on him, he never has done it, he keeps saying he doesn't have enough money, but it's supposedly he agreed to do that, yeah. That's something we need to probably revisit again this summer.
Dwayne, I do appreciate that you managed to cut that much on the first ask. Because,
Yeah,
I mean, that's
We tried
a
to,
great start.
trying to look at, what we assumed we'll lose some, revenue, of course, but then, and on the other side, we wouldn't need to expend as much. So I tried to cut as much as I could on each item. And like I said, we can go deeper. We have some plans that we need to start laying off. We were gonna lay the sweeper and the weekends off, and then we decided, it's kind of picked up quicker than we thought. And so we're really, we didn't have a guy on the weekends, and we got called in, we started looking at overtime, so we haven't laid him off yet, so.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
You're at 3390 here. If we were to ask you to go to 40, could you?
Well, we could try to make it. Those numbers there are realistically, we think we could get there. Of course, payroll on our end is, we're probably not, starting the whole budget, we're not 20% of what we're looking at. So you get in a lot of that, you've got utilities and electric and some of the chemical stuff that you get to a point where I couldn't cut there, so.
I mean, unfortunately, we're in a situation now where we just don't know how much money we're gonna have. So regardless of what we want to cut, or what you want to cut, or all of us want to cut, it's still gonna be dictated by the amount of cash we have coming in. So, I guess that's why I asked the question,
Well, we could get there, yeah, we could, like you said, we could stop services, we could pull, we could keep pulling back, yeah. There's ways to get to 40, yeah, but, say if you say 50 or, what happens at some point, obviously, there would have to be there's gonna have to be an influx of money, or, at some point you get, and we're not there, I'm not saying we're there yet, but if you hit that point, there's some services I don't think you can stop, I mean.
Well, that's why I keep saying it would be nice to know what our essential costs are, and that includes services. What are the essential services? And I know you know them, we just probably, the majority of us here don't know what those are. And is one more important than the other? Because it really does come down to, will we have the cash in order to do those? And it would be fantastic if we had the money, but what if we don't?
Well, at a certain point, then yeah, the state would have to step in, or somebody would have to put that money, or we would have to somehow bond or find that money, or.
What is the federal government offering us, anything? Or the
Nothing
state?
yet,
No,
nothing yet.
Neither the
There's
state
nothing.
nor the fed.
no. That's what I'm saying, we're kind of,
We don't know if they will, supposedly, they might, but, you can't, we're not depending on it.
Yeah.
We got water sewer bonds, we gotta pay our water and sewer bill. If we blow out a water pipe, we gotta fix it. I mean, there's certain things we gotta do, so.
but you also have to have money.
Well,
So,
then we gotta get it from somewhere else, huh?
well, do you have any?
Can't run a town without water.
It depends on whose pocket you're looking at. So-
Well, there's some things that we could, I think one of the things that Lonnie talked about, what we've got to do is we've got to monitor, these are some proposals on recommendations that the department heads have come up with on way to reduce their costs. We got to monitor our sales tax coming in. We got to monitor what's going on into there. Some of it we won't know for several months where we are.
No, we won't.
Tax rate.
We won't know for 2 months, yeah,
But,
unfortunately.
Property tax will fall.
Yeah,
but don't you think that we should at least establish something now
I
so
think,
that we can modify going forward?
in my mind, and I haven't seen what the police department is doing, but with what parks, or not, what street and water and sewer is offering, I mean, the fire department is nominal. You know, it's just a token of good faith is really all that is. I mean, I wish they could do more, because it's a high dollar unit, but, if the police is in,
Fire and EMS.
yeah, if the police department is in line with Dwayne, then, you know, I think we can, okay, with that, we can sit and see where we are, you know, every 30 days. I think we kind of got to look at it and see.
Yeah, a lot of the first things I would be cutting, of course, is coming on the street side, and we have a little better reserves there than we had water, but, you know, I mean, your grass can grow and holes can not be patched, stuff
Right,
like that,
right.
but once you get in,
But water line breaks, you got to fix it.
we're talking a chemical cost, and that's not gonna change, but we could, you know, there's a little, maybe more we can squeeze there, but, you know, we're getting close, and we were talking about that earlier, is Fund 80 is, you know, we're gonna have to get back, the people are gonna have to, obviously, we're gonna have to collect for the water, and we don't want them to get too far behind, and it's gonna be hard to pay, but if we don't collect our revenue, we can't operate.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? If there's no money,
Yeah, we run off that, and it's now, it doesn't exist, so unless we change that, I mean, we would have to shut the city down, basically, we wouldn't be a first-class city at that point, so, we're gonna have to encourage everybody, some people can't, obviously, we don't wanna force that, but we need a plan to come out of this thing, and even, you know, even in the next year, or
I think
the
that's
next one.
I think that's what we're doing. I mean, the governor's trying to get us in that forward thrust. And it's, you know, I think we're pushing the car right now to try and get it to jumpstart, but it's gonna jumpstart.
Yeah, that's, but,
Restaurants can start to open up, you know, a lot of them maybe not, but won't, but the opportunity's there, and it's gonna evolve, and as people come into the streets, there's gonna be a point where those that wanna hold out and not open yet they're either gonna open or they're not, because there comes to a point that you can only take so much, and you gotta, if a frog had wings, you wouldn't bump his ass. You gotta jump out there and do something. I mean, it's gonna come. It's got to.
Susan?
I know when we sat last week in the CAPC meeting, we had our discussions, and we determined at that point that it looked like our overall budget for the remainder of the year would be decreased by approximately, I think we said, what, 35%? And that's why I asked about 40%. Because obviously we had a good first quarter, but we do have the remainder of the year. And I would like for this group to establish that we at least give a number that we would like to have as a target. Maybe not today, but we're already 2 months into this and we haven't done anything. To say that we'd like to see a 30% decrease, a 40% decrease or something, so that months later, whether it's next month or 2 months from now, we can make adjustments if we need to.
Well, and that's fine. Let's go ahead and get the police. I think what Dwayne's done is 30%.
No, and that's why I said I
but
appreciate what he's done.
you're doing this right now, right? Yeah, that's.
Okay, Dwayne's come up with this, a solution that we're working on. Now, I want to talk about the police, and then we can go back. But I think the council needs to realize, you want to have an ambulance service. That's where our problem is. Not a problem, but that's where the cost is.
Sure.
So we can't cut 40% and keep 2 ambulances going. We just can't do it. So it's up to the council, and then you're going to tell your constituents, sorry, we're going to only operate one ambulance, or none.
Right now, we're contractually obligated.
Well, you know,
For
yeah,
Western
you're
District.
right.
Now, I don't know if there's
I
some
think
kind of a power on that.
that's coming up for renewal too.
But I mean, reality is, if we don't have the money, we don't have the money. I mean,
I'm not saying, Susan, I'm not arguing with you. I'm saying the council's got to make a decision.
Yes.
Right, well,
Bob?
I agree with you, but
all I was gonna say, of what maybe council should do is, council should pick a figure, but it should be an overall figure.
That's, yeah.
And then you should be the one that would say, for instance, if we said 30% cut, you might say, police need to cut 30%, but fire department only needs to cut 10%. That would be in your bailiwick.
We can try that one too. I wanted to bring this up because last time we wanted some perception and you wanted to see some budget figures, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now,
No, there's nothing wrong with what we're doing.
Please, and I'm gonna jump ahead because I think Dwayne did an excellent job.
Thank you.
on
Yeah,
that.
you did, thank you.
Send Brian
Yeah, let's do the place.
5 minutes.
I might have a headlight bulb for
And,
you.
my perception is that we do set an amount like Bob says. and
That's fine. We
Your-
should- I understand.
You spread that out wherever you think that can be done.
And, Lonnie and I can come up with the best things that we can. The police, and Susan, I apologize when I said something about the percentage, you were probably correct. It was the police that had almost 12% cut in their budget. They've cut 2 full-time positions, and then went with some four part-time positions.
Which one am I looking at now?
Police.
Mayor, while we're waiting for Brian to come up, can I say a couple of things here? And it kind of in answer to your question, Bob, and with what Susan is talking about, we have to get a grasp on this thing right now. We can't go back to the first quarter. And what keeps me awake at night is, what are we going to do when we've exhausted all of the money that we can tap into, and we can't write a check for payroll? I mean, this is payroll week, and we're talking about $90,000 for payroll this
Is that
week.
your month?
I'm sorry?
Is that your month? 90 for the month?
Now, that's for this pay period.
Okay.
Without the
Oh,
hospital?
okay, I got you.
Sorry?
Without the hospital, or including the hospital?
We don't pay the hospital. No. The hospital, they pay their own and everything. We really don't do anything. Last week was just accounts payable week. We spent $200,000. We wrote checks for $200,000 last week for vendors. What happens when we can't do that? And what I'm trying to present to you is 3 scenarios, or to the group, and if you wanted something different, then you need to let me know. But 3 scenarios from now till the end of the year, that this is what would be if it was at 70%, 40%, 50%. And, I don't have any authority to do anything other than to work the numbers and show you what the situation is. And that's what I'm trying to do. And the mayor has put out to the department heads, like the police here and everything. And so, but there's going to have to be some hard decisions made, and you all are the ones that are ultimately going to have to make them.
I don't think anybody at the table is not ready to make those decisions.
Lonnie, isn't our sales tax revenue is about 60% of our income, correct?
Probably, I can't answer that
But
right
in
off. But yes, in the general fund especially,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Okay, and I'm projecting we're probably going to be 50% down on that if we're lucky.
If we're lucky, in my opinion.
Question, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah.
And then Brian, can we pull out the vehicle replacement? I mean, is your,
Well, right, 14,000 of that I am turning back. Because originally we had 60,000 budget,
60,
right?
right.
46 we've already committed to, we've already,
Oh, we've already bought those vehicles?
Right.
Oh, those,
so the rest of it, I'm turning back.
okay, so 46 is already spent,
Right,
or whatever.
or accounted for, yes.
Okay. All right. I was gonna ask
would have it, it was already committed and bought.
Okay, that's done.
You shouldn't be doing this too much.
All right, so you're saying your amended budget is $1,000,001?
Yes,
And so we're only cutting 136,247 for the remainder of the year,
right, plus the 14,000.
plus the 14. Okay, so
140.
140.
Be 150. 14,000 or 136,000.
Yeah, 150, that's right. Thank you for correcting.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I'm wrong.
Okay, so you're at 13? Sorry, this is just all numbers, really. Where are you, where else do you think you could cut? I mean, it's the same questions across everybody.
Right,
It's-
along with the cuts that I'm already looking at, is I'm faced with the possibility, more than likely, I may be losing another officer at the end of this month. Okay?
And that's by choice, or is that through you? Is that their choice
No, that's
or
his
your
choice.
choice? Pardon?
Possibly by his, maybe, I don't know yet, it's not confirmed.
Somebody may be deleted.
Maybe, yes.
Okay. And if, I mean, you're at 13%, if you were to double that, would that be doable? If you were closer to 30%?
Like I say, if I was to lose any more, it would be a burden on us, yes.
Well, we all have burdens.
There you go. I'm sorry?
And we all have burdens.
Right, like I say, the biggest thing, being that it's a burden on us, I'm afraid that, yeah, we could run like a skeleton crew, but I don't want it to affect the community.
Yeah, well, you know, I think we all feel the same way,
Right.
but we just had this, you know, the discussion really is, if we don't have the money, you won't have the choice.
Like I say, if that person was to leave, I would not be filling that spot, so that would be an additional, another spot not being filled.
Right.
So what I'm asking you is, you've got 13% down. Can you bump that up to 30% and still be able to provide the services, not exactly the way we do today, but should we need to? Because, I mean, really, this conversation is, we don't know if we're gonna have the money. And so,
Right.
if we don't have the money, it doesn't matter what we do on this paper.
Right.
We're just not
Some of the
gonna-
other savings that aren't shown there, because when the officers are budgeted, they're budgeted for 86 hours during their pay thing, but in reality, the majority of them work 80 hours. So there's extra, at the end of the budget, there's thousands that aren't going to be used. Okay? Along with, like overtime hours, there's going to be additional overtime savings and stuff like that.
So if you were to cut those now, if you were to show that as a cut now, which is not reflected in this number here, correct?
Correct.
That's what I'm asking you. If you were
Right.
to do those things, could you get up to 30%?
Pretty close of it.
Okay.
Pretty close.
And is there anything else besides those two things that you could do?
Anything that we deem is not an emergency that would break down, just like vehicle maintenance, sideline any vehicles that are broke down, or older vehicles that are going to be replaced in the next year or so, sidelining those vehicles.
And do you have, within your department, within your guidelines, within your outline, do you have a disaster plan? What are my essentials? Not only workers, but services.
There are essential, our vehicles, our people, they're all essential items.
Well, of course
I mean,
they are.
it's kind of hard for me to
I guess
define
what
as
I'm
far
saying
as,
is, because we're actually operating under disaster, it's a disaster, right?
Right.
We don't know if we're gonna have enough money, so at a minimum, I guess what I'm asking is, do you have what you know is your, and I know this is a budget, you know what at a minimum you are required by state law or whatever it is to provide.
right.
and where would that number fall? With-
In this number here, we've already cut everything like utilities, like phone. I mean, those things I can't change. Those are just things that
No,
are
I
there.
know, I'm just
Yeah.
asking.
Yeah, I
in a
can't change
different
that. Basically, everything that I could possibly cut, I cut.
I'm gonna make a suggestion, and it's gonna be difficult. But I think it's something that you need to look at, that not today, but a month from now, you may have got another 15%, for a total of 30%. And so I think you need to take a hard look and see how you're gonna get there. Because you're gonna have to figure out what, prioritize, and I've gotta keep this, and I can let this go, and, I mean, it's,
I don't know why we would wait a month. I mean, we're kind of in that situation. We've already gone 2 months through this. It's not getting any better for at least 2 months.
I guess my question with that would be is, with the mayor and finance director, what are they seeing as far as the flow?
Well, and I think that's the next thing, and, we're just about out of town. Lonnie, and I don't mean to, I think something, Brian, you need to go ahead and like Terry said, think about this, because we'll be talking about it, and I think you can come up with an extra 15% without a problem. I think it's easier for you than Nick. Lonnie, you want to talk about some other options that you're looking at?
Well, there are some things that we can cut. We fully insure every city employee to the tune of about $500 a month on health insurance. We have about 7 employees, so that's about $35,000 a month that if we wanted to cut health insurance for our employees. That's an option. I've identified, as I started to tell you last time and we got off track, I've identified probably about $2 million in reserves, CDs and different accounts, depreciation accounts and so forth that we can tap into to keep us going for a while. We have the I&I fund down in water sewer that's got presently about $600,000 in it. Now there's some plans to spend some of that money for what it was intended for, but if you as council want to redirect that money, you remember we loaned money from the general fund to water sewer, which was, that was a real issue there for a while. But now, if we needed some of that money back, we could pay the loan back with some of that to get it back into and support the fire department or whatever. So, because it was a loan. If it wasn't a loan, we wouldn't be able to do that. It would be locked in, period. So, at any rate,
What does it cost us to broadcast these meetings?
I have no idea. Susan?
How many days, I'm hoping you've got a couple months. How long will that 2 million go? Is it a 2-month reserve, essentially?
Really might squeeze 3 out of it.
I don't think we need to even touch reserves at this point. I mean, this is just starting. We don't know, we could have a relapse of
Well-
this thing in the fall and dump us, lose our whole winter.
And whenever I'm talking about health insurance, I mean, that's not something we want to do, but if we're out of money and we
Not
can't
talking
write
about the reserves, the cash.
can't write a check, well then, what are we going to do?
That's right.
I mean,
And I was
you're exactly right, Susan. I
When you
mean,
say that lasts us 2 or 3 months, that's with zero income coming in?
that's basically with zero income.
Our yearly total is, where are we at, what was our budget set at this year? Was it 10?
11.
It was close to 11, wasn't it? Okay, that's what I was thinking, so figured
So it's not a good situation. I presented you with some scenarios. You have to make the
When are you
decision.
going to send us in the next day?
I'm going to send you a full worksheet of what you have here with everything on it. And it'll have the 70, 60, 40, or 50, just like this, except it'll be every department and the totals.
I would like I would like to see at least a 30 to 35% cut, wherever you can do it overall on a budget
Right now.
right now.
I will do my best to get that to you. Excuse me for interrupting, but I'll do my best to get it to you tomorrow
I don't know
afternoon.
do we vote on that?
We can't vote on it right now.
That
Bob?
works.
I was going to suggest that we should add council and budget to the agenda tonight.
Yes.
So that we can vote and give some directives
Yeah.
to the mayor and to the finance director.
You want to be in charge of that?
All right.
I'll add it, yeah.
All right. Brian, thank you very much. Lonnie, thank you. Lonnie May, we're going to be talking about refinancing the series bonds here. All right. Are we ready? Okay. Can I get a roll call to establish quorum, Madam Clerk?
Susan Harmon.
Here.
Bob Thomas.
Here.
Vicky Snyder.
Yes.
Harry Meyer.
Here.
Melissa Green.
Here.
Terry McClung.
I'm here.
We have 6.
All right, stand, pledge allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, get a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All right, Mr. Thomas?
I'd like to add council discussion on the budget.
Second.
Guys, why can't I hear you all of a sudden?
Sorry.
All right. Any other items?
Are you postponing number 2?
Is she not going to be here?
No.
True.
Okay, then we'll defer item number 2 until our next meeting. Okay, get a motion to approve the agenda as amended.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so moved. Get a motion to approve the minutes for April 27th.
So moved.
Any additions, corrections? Hearing none, all those in favor, signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Under commissions, we have Dave Harmon has put his reapplication in for position 4, expired on May 5th.
I'd like to make a motion to approve Dave Hartman for position 4. He's been an excellent Parks Commissioner.
Any discussion? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay. Y'all should have received the third quarter and fourth quarter Parks budget, financials in email. They will be having, I think, giving us one more report to bring that up to date.
Okay.
All right, there being no unfinished business, get a motion to discuss the ordinance to refinance the Series 2 bond.
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Okay. We have bond counsel on Zoom.
What?
Motion to discuss?
I just want to make sure we got bond counsel on Zoom first. Okay. All right, got him.
It's done.
Get a motion to discuss?
Motion to discuss.
Second.
I'd like to clarify something we've been discussing, and I said, mentioned at the last meeting about the sales tax that's financing this. The sales tax was passed in 1990. Ordinance number 1386, and all it states is immediate improvement of municipal services for a new source of revenue to finance such services. So it had nothing to do with the water sewer fund. That came later. So this is a permanent tax just for providing services. On the ballot, it stated that it's hereby ascertained and declared that there is a great need to establish a new source of revenue to finance vital municipal services in order to promote and protect the health, safety, and welfare of the city and its inhabitants. It is therefore declared that an emergency exists, and this ordinance being necessary for the immediate preservation of public peace, health, and safety shall be enforced and take effect immediately after this passage. So that kind of sorts it out.
Mr. Thomas?
Which tax is it that is split 65-35, streets and general fund?
Lonnie?
I believe, Mr. Thomas, it's the other 1% that's split that way.
Passed in 2012?
No, I don't.
No, this is 1990. There was, the other tax was earlier.
I think it probably was because it had been distributed different ways throughout the years, and I think that it came down to a point of where whenever it was determined that it was not being done properly, it had to be redone, and the clerk probably knows more about that than I do, but as I recall, it was to clean it up and put it back in its original form and distribution. Is that somewhat?
2083, the ordinance 2083 was passed in 2008, and that's the ordinance that redirected what was initially voted for infrastructure to the 65-35. Is that the answer? I mean,
I just am wondering what this 2012 sales tax refunding these bonds was.
We dug that all the way back to these ordinance and this sales tax right here in 1990.
that's one of them.
One, yeah.
All right, any further comments? Mr. Moyer, is it Mr. Moyer online?
Yes, sir.
All right, you have any comments or?
Sure, I can walk through the ordinance a little bit, just to whatever extent it's all want me to. This is a refinancing of some 2012 bonds. I couldn't hear it really clearly, but there was discussion about the tax. The tax, the security bond was levied in 1990, 1% tax. It's the same tax that secured bonds going back quite a ways, at least until 2005, maybe back further than that. But this is refinancing bonds from 2012 for debt service sake. With the net effect being, and I know that there are representatives from Raymond James that are on the line that can talk to you about the actual net effect of the refinance. But that's the point of this, is to save money, make, I believe that the way savings are being made available to you, it will be available within 1 year. Structure, the bonds are not extended at all. They will mature on October 1, 2027, which is the same as the maturity for the current 2012 bonds. One thing that's different about this transaction is there is not a debt service reserve for this one like there has been fund a rainy day, debt service fund to pay debt service in the event that you need. So, that's something that the purchaser of the bond is not requiring this time around. It is required on some other transactions. As far as other things to talk about, closing will be on June 16th, assuming that you approve the ordinance in full tonight. That's the date that the 2012 bonds will be fully retired and pay new bonds go into effect. As far as the application of the tax and how this works from the city's perspective, y'all will not see any change. The way that this works is, the way that the existing tax bond issue works, and the way that the new bond issue works, is the money goes from the state treasurer to the trustee for the bonds. Within 2 business days, I believe it's 2 business days, let me check on that. Within 2 business days of the date that the trustee gets the bond, gets the money from the state, that whatever they need, do not need to pay debt service and pay fees will then be transferred back to the city to use for the purposes of the tax. And that's the same as it was in 2012. One difference is this time, 2012, Bancorp South Bank, Stuttgart was the trustee. This time around, Regions Bank was the trustee. There are some old funds related to the 2012 bond, a debt service reserve, and monthly deposits that you've made into the bond fund. That money is being used, appropriated by this ordinance to use to help accomplish the refinance. But essentially, at the end of the day, there's not going to be that much change from the city's perspective, other than for overall debt service purposes.
How much was that?
Susan?
How much was used, or how much was in that to use for the refinancing? Approximately.
Debt service reserve?
Let me see.
In the debt service reserve fund or the debt service fund?
Whichever one you were using to refinance.
So in the debt service reserve fund, there was $151,000.
Okay.
And in the debt service fund, there was and this is a projection based on the monthly collections we were getting, between now and closing, it should be $109,000.
Okay.
And I would just emphasize that money is being used to pay down the old debt, so it's not, it's still going to what it's originally.
Any other questions? Mr. Meyer?
And that's why this year's debt service is so low, because we're using those reserves to catch it up. Is that right?
It's a combination of the releasing of the reserve and the lower interest rate. The way we do it was so that to give you all the economic benefit in the first year to help offset any budget challenges that may occur due to coronavirus.
Any other questions?
One more thing to add on this, Mayor, probably the most important thing that the ordinance does from the city's perspective is it authorizes the mayor to immediately accept the offer of Regions Equipment Finance Corporation by signing the letter of offer of recommendation. And the rate is only good, the rate that's been offered is only good through today. And I think, I couldn't really hear, but I think I had someone maybe ask about the emergency clause. That's the necessity for the emergency clause, give the mayor immediate authority to sign the letter of offer of representation, lock the savings in for the city. By accepting the letter of offer of representation, the mayor is locking in the interest rate on the bond. Otherwise, you're going to be subjected to interest rate cuts until the next council.
I don't have an do you have an emergency clause in?
It's in here.
No.
We don't have an emergency clause with the ordinance.
The title declares an emergency.
I'm sorry, Mayor, you said that there's not one on the one that you have?
Hang on.
The one that I'm looking at does not have an emergency clause, no.
The title, Bob said the title.
But the step of, that last formal step,
Would be.
And the one that I sent you had one, and it's section 26 is the, I'm looking at copies that I emailed you and have been declaring an emergency and title. And it's section 26.
there is a section 26.
Yeah, it says.
Oh, okay. Section
That's it.
26 is the emergency clause.
Yeah.
Okay.
It just looks different than what we're accustomed to seeing.
Okay.
Thank you for zeroing in on that.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we assign this ordinance a number and place it on its first reading.
I'll second.
Okay, got a motion by Mr. McClung to sign this ordinance a number, place it on for first reading, and second by Mr. Meyer. Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? Okay, so moved.
The ordinance number will be 2295, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a sales and use tax refunding bond for the purpose of refinancing the cost of capital improvements, pledging a 1% sales and use tax to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds, prescribing other matters relating thereto, and declaring an emergency. Whereas the City of Eureka Springs, the city, has previously issued under Amendment Number 62 of the Constitution of the State of Arkansas in Title 14, Chapter 164, Subchapter 3 of the Arkansas Code of 1987 annotated, the authorizing legislation, its sales and use tax refunding bonds, Series 2012, the Series 2012 bonds, for the purpose of refinancing the costs of capital improvements, and whereas the City Council has determined the city will be able to achieve debt service savings by refunding the Series 2012 bonds, and whereas the city can obtain the necessary funds for the refunding of the Series 2012 bonds, refunding, by the issuance of a sales and use tax refunding bond, Series 2020, in the principal amount of $1,840,566, the Series 2020 bond, and by appropriating available funds held for the Series 2012 bonds, and whereas the city has received an offer for the purchase of the Series 2020 bond from Regions Equipment Finance Corporation, the lender, at a price of par, the purchase price, pursuant to a letter of offer and representation, the offer, which has been presented to and is before this meeting. And whereas the bondholder disclosure agreement between the city and the lender, the disclosure agreement, providing for the disclosure and reporting obligations of the city with respect to the Series 2020 bond, has been presented to and is before this meeting. Now therefore be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, Section 1, refunding shall be accomplished, and the mayor and city clerk are hereby authorized to take all actions necessary in connection therewith and to execute all required contracts and documents. The Series 2012 bond shall be called for redemption on the date the Series 2020 bond is issued, or the earliest practicable date thereafter, at a redemption price equal to the principal amount outstanding plus accrued interest. Section 2. The offer of the lender for the purchase of the Series 2020 bond from the city at the purchase price for a Series 2020 bond bearing interest at this rate per annum, maturing and otherwise subject to the terms and provisions hereafter in this ordinance set forth in detail, is hereby accepted, and the Series 2020 bond is hereby sold to the lender. The mayor is hereby authorized and directed to execute and deliver the offer on behalf of the city. Section 3. Under the authority of the Constitution and laws of the state, including particularly Amendment Number 62 to the Constitution of the state, and Title 14, Chapter 164, Subchapter 3 of the Arkansas Code of 1987 annotated, the City of Eureka Springs, Arkansas Sales and Use Tax Refunding Bond, Series 2020, is hereby authorized and ordered, issued in the total principal amount of $1,840,566. The proceeds from the sale of which are necessary, along with available funds, to accomplish the refunding, pay expenses incidental thereto, and pay expenses of issuing the Series 2020 bond. The Series 2020 bond and any additional parity bonds issued under Section 10 hereof are referred to herein collectively as the bonds. The Series 2020 bond shall mature on October 1, 2027, and shall bear interest at the rate of 1.64% per annum. In the event of a determination of taxability, as defined below, the interest rate on the Series 2020 bond shall automatically increase to the taxable rate, as defined below, retroactive to the date of issuance of the Series 2020 bond, and the city shall pay such additional amount as will result in the lender receiving the interest component of the Series 2020 bond payments at the taxable rate. Determination of taxability shall mean and shall occur when, 1, the lender receives written notice from the city, supported by a written opinion of legal counsel duly admitted to practice law before the highest court of any state who may be counsel for the city, that interest on the Series 2020 bond is taxable, as defined below, due to any action by the city, or 2, the Internal Revenue Service shall issue a final determination in writing that interest on the Series 2020 bond is taxable due to any action by the city, provided that a determination of taxability shall not be deemed to have occurred until and unless the city is afforded reasonable opportunity at the expense of the city and for a period not to exceed 2 years to pursue any judicial or administrative remedy available to it with respect to such determination, and avails itself of such opportunity by appropriate proceedings diligently pursued. Taxable shall mean that interest on the Series 2020 bond is includable in the gross income in the computation of federal income tax liability for the holder of the Series 2020 bond, provided, however, interest on the Series 2020 bond shall not be deemed taxable because interest is includable in any calculation of income for the purposes of an alternative minimum tax or any other type of taxation other than the regular federal tax imposed on income. Taxable rate means a fixed rate of interest equal to 2.15% on the outstanding principal balance on the Series 2020 bond. The Series 2020 bond shall be issuable only as one fully registered bond without coupons in the denomination of $100,000 and integral multiples of $1 in excess of $100,000. Unless the city shall otherwise direct, the Series 2020 bonds shall be numbered R1. The Series 2020 bond is not being registered with the depository trust company. Interest on the Series 2020 bond shall be payable on October 1, 2020, and semi-annually thereafter on April 1 and October 1 of each year. Payment of each installment of principal and interest shall be made to the person in whose name the Series 2020 bond is registered on the registration books of the city maintained by Regions Bank with officers in Little Rock, Arkansas as trustee and paying agent, the trustee. At the close of business on the 15th day of the month, whether or not a business day, next preceding each interest payment date, the record date, irrespective of any transfer or exchange of the Series 2020 bonds subsequent to such record date and prior to such interest payment date. The Series 2020 bond shall bear interest from the payment date next preceding the date on which it is authenticated, unless it is authenticated on an interest payment date, in which event it shall bear interest from such date, or unless it is authenticated prior to the first interest payment date, in which event it shall bear interest from its dated date, or unless it's authenticated during the period from the record date to the next interest payment date, in which case it shall bear interest from such interest payment date, or unless at the time of authentication thereof, interest is in default thereon, in which event it shall bear interest from the date to which the interest has been paid. The certificate of authentication substantially in the form set forth in section 5 hereof, the certificate, duly executed by the trustee, shall be endorsed on the Series 2020 bond. The Series 2020 bond shall not be valid and obligatory for any purpose, nor shall they be entitled to or any right or benefit under this ordinance unless and until the certificate shall have been duly executed by the trustee, and the certificate upon the 2020 series bond, the 2020 bond, shall be conclusive evidence that the Series 2020 bond has been authenticated and delivered under this ordinance. The certificate on ordinance 2020 bond shall be deemed to have been executed if signed by an authorized officer of the trustee. In case the Series 2020 bond shall become mutilated or be destroyed or lost, the city shall, if not then prohibited by law, cause to be executed, and the trustees may authenticate and deliver a new bond in exchange and substitution for, and upon cancellation of the mutilated bond, or in lieu of, and in substitution for the bond destroyed or lost, upon the owner paying the reasonable expenses and charges of the city and trustee in connection therewith, and in the case of a bond destroyed or lost, his filing with the trustee evidence satisfactory to it that such bond was destroyed or lost, and of his ownership thereof, and furnishing the city and trustee with indemnity satisfactory to them. The trustee is hereby authorized to authenticate any such new bond. In the event the bond shall have matured, instead of issuing a new bond, the city may pay the same without the surrender thereof. Upon the issuance of a new bond under this section, the city may require the payment of a sum sufficient to cover any tax or other governmental charge that may be imposed in relation thereto, and any other expense, including the fees and expenses of the trustee connected therewith. The city shall cause books to be maintained for the registration and for the transfer of the Series 2020 bond as provided herewith and in the Series 2020 bond. The trustee shall act as the bond registrar. The Series 2020 bond is transferable by the owner thereof or by his attorney duly authorized in writing, in full or in part, to any person or entity in the owner's sole and absolute discretion at the principal office of the trustee. On such transfer, a new fully registered bond will be issued to the transferee in exchange therefor. The city may not assign the rights under this ordinance or under the Series 2020 bond to any person without the prior written consent of the holder. Want to take a turn?
Sure. No charge shall be made to the owner of the Series 2020 bond for the privilege of transfer or exchange, but the owner of a Series 20 bond requesting such transfer or exchange shall pay any tax or other government charge required to be paid with respect thereto, except as otherwise provided in the immediate preceding sentence. The cost of preparing each new bond upon each exchange or transfer and any other expense of the city or trustee incurred in connection therewith shall be paid by the city. The person in whose name the Series 2020 bond shall be registered and shall be deemed and regarded as the absolute owner thereof for all purposes and payment of or on account of the principal premium, if any, or interest of the Series 2020 bond, shall be made only to or upon the order of the registered owner thereof or his legal representative. But such registration may be changed as herein above provided. All such payments shall be valid and effectual to satisfy and discharge the liability upon such Series 2020 bond to the extent of the sum or sums so paid. In any case where the date of the maturity of interest on or principal of the Series 2020 bond or the date fixed for redemption of the Series 2020 bond shall be a Saturday or a Sunday, or shall be in the state a legal holiday or a date on which the banking institutions are authorized by law to close, then payment of interest or principal and premiums, if any, need not be made on such date, but may be made on the next succeeding business day with the same force and effect as if made on the date of maturity or the date fixed for redemption, and no interest shall accrue for the period after the date of maturity or date fixed for the redemption. Section 4. Series 2020 bond shall be executed on behalf of the city by the manual or facsimile signature of the mayor and city clerk, and shall have impressed or imprinted thereon the seal of the city. Section 5. The Series 2020 bond and the certificate shall be in substantially the following form, and the mayor and city clerk are hereby expressly authorized and directed to make all recitals contained therein. Form of Series 2020 bond, registered number R1, registered $1,840,566. United States of America, State of Arkansas, County of Carroll, City of Eureka Springs, sale and use tax refunding bond, Series 2020. Interest rate 1.64%, maturity date October 1, 2027, dated date 2020. What is today?
May 11th?
Dated date May 11th,
Yes.
2020. Registered owner, Regions Equipment Finance Corporation, principal amount $1,840,566. Known by all men, by these presents, that the City of Eureka Springs, Carroll County of Carroll, State of Arkansas, the city, for value received, hereby promise to pay to the registered owners shown above upon presentation and surrender hereof at the Corporate Trust Office of Regions Bank in Little Rock, Arkansas, or its successors or successors as trustee and paying agents, the trustee, on the maturity date shown above, the principal amount shown above in such coin or currency of the United States of America as at the time of payment shall be the legal tender for the payment of public and private debts, and to pay by check or draft to the registered owners shown above interest thereon, in like coin or currency from the interest commencement date specified below at the interest rate per annum shown above, payable on October 1st, 2020, and on each April 1st and October 1st thereafter, until payment of such principal amount, or if this bond or portion hereof shall be duly called for redemption, until the date fixed for redemption, and to pay interest on overdue principal and interest, to the extent legally enforceable, at the rate borne by this bond, Payment of each installment of interest shall be made to the person in whose name this bond is registered on the registration books of the city maintained by the trustee at the close of business on the 15th day of the month, whether or not a business day, next preceding each interest payment date, the record date, irrespective of any transfer or exchange of this bond subsequent to record date and prior to such interest and payment date. This bond shall bear interest calculated on a 360-day basis from the payment date next preceding the date on which it is authenticated, unless it is authenticated on an interest payment date, in which case it shall bear interest from the date, or unless it's authenticated during the period from the record date to the next interest payment date, in which case it shall bear interest from such interest payment date, or unless it is authenticated prior to the first interest payment date, in which event it shall bear interest from the dated date shown above, or unless at the time of authentication hereof interest is herein default hereon, in which event it shall bear interest from the date to which the interest has been paid. Upon the occurrence of a determination of taxability as defined in Section 3 of the authorizing ordinance, this bond shall bear interest as set forth above at the rate of 2.15%, the taxable rate. In addition, the city shall make immediately upon demand of the holder of this bond a payment to such holder sufficient to supplement prior payment of interest on this bond to the taxable rate. This bond constitutes an issue designated City of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, sales and use tax refunding bond, Series 2020, the bond in the principal amount of $1,840,566 and is issued for the purpose of providing a portion of the funds to refund certain outstanding bonds of the city, pay necessary expenses incidental thereto, and pay expenses of authorizing and issuing the bond. The bond is pursuant to and in full compliance with the Constitution and the laws of the state of Arkansas, the state, particularly Amendment Number 62 to the Constitution of the state and Title 14, Chapter 165, Subchapter 3 of the Arkansas Code 1987, annotated, the authorizing legislation in pursuant of this ordinance number 2295?
Yes.
Of the city duly adopted on May 11th, 2020, the authorizing ordinance. An election duly held at which the majority of legal voters of the city of Eureka, legal voters of the city voting on the question approved the indebtedness represented by the bond. Reference is hereby made to the authorizing ordinance for the details of the nature and extent of the security and of the right and obligation of the city, the trustees, and the registered owner of the bond. The bond is a special obligation of the city payable from the proceeds derived by the city from 1% sales and use tax, the tax, levied by the city under the authority of the law of the state of in ordinance number 1386 of the city, duly adopted on March 20th, 1990. And the city hereby pledges its collection of the tax for the payment of this bond. The city has reserved the right in the authorizing ordinance to issue additional bonds under the authorizing ordinance on a parity of security with the bond. This bond shall be subject to optional and mandatory sinking fund redemption as follows. 1, this bond is subject to redemption at the option of the city from funds of any sort, from any source, on or after October 1, 2025, in whole or in part at any time at a redemption price equal to the principal amount being redeemed plus accrued interest to the redemption date. In the event of an optional redemption of less than the entire principal amount of this bond, principal to be redeemed shall be applied in inverse chronological order of sinking fund installment due. 2, this bond is subject to mandatory sinking fund redemption on October 1 in each of the years and in the amount set forth below at a redemption price equal to the principal amount being redeemed plus accrued interest to the date of redemption. Year October 1, 2020 principal amount $5,509. 2021, $268,140. 2021, $276,417.
That's a typo.
Mayor, this is,
That's 2022.
I know that needs to be changed to 2022. I'll change that on my version and I'll email that to you tomorrow.
2022, $276,417. 2023, $278,825. 2024, $285,748. 2025, $286,954. 2026, $292,615. 2027 maturity, $146,358. In the event of an optional redemption of this bond, principal shall be applied in inverse chronological order of sinking fund installment D. Not less than 10 business days prior to the date on which the city selects to optionally redeem this bond or any portion thereof, the city will provide the trustee with written instructions to redeem this bond or portion thereof. Notice of optional redemption identifying this bond or portion thereof, which portion shall be 5,000 or multiple thereof to be redeemed, shall be given by the trustees at least 5 business days to the date fixed for redemption by mailing a copy of the redemption notice by first-class mail, postage prepaid, or by sending a copy of the redemption notice via other standard means, including electronic or facsimile communication to the registered owner. If this bond has been called for redemption in full and if funds are duly provided and set aside in accordance with the authorizing ordinance prior to the date fixed for redemption, this bond will cease to bear interest on such redemption date. This bond is transferable by the registered owner in whole or in part to any persons or entity in his sole and absolute discretion, in person or by his attorney in fact duly authorized in writing at the principal corporate trust office of the trustee, but only in the manner subject to the limitations and upon payment of the charges provided by the authorizing ordinance and upon surrender and cancellation of this bond. Upon such transfer, a new fully registered bond will be issued to the transferee in exchange thereof. Therefore, this bond is issued with the intent that the laws of the state shall govern its construction. The city may not assign its right or obligations hereunder or under the authorizing ordinance to any person without prior written consent of the registered owner hereof. The city and the trustee may deem and treat the registered owner shown above as the absolute owner hereof for the purpose of receiving payment of or on account of principal hereof and interest due hereon, and for all other purposes, and neither the city nor the trustee shall be affected by any notice to the contrary. This bond is issuable only as one fully registered bond in the denomination of $100,000 and integral multiples of $1 in excess of $100,000. Terry, you want to?
Sure. Mayor, I'd be happy to take a turn too, if y'all would like me to. I read it, I can get through it pretty quickly.
I'll go ahead for a little bit. It is hereby certified, recited, and declared that all acts, conditions, and things required to exist happen and be performed under the Constitution and laws of the state, particularly amended number 62 to the Constitution of the state and the authorizing legislation precedent to and in the issuance of this bond have existed, have happened, and have been performed in due time, forms and manners required by law, that the indebtedness represented to this bond and the issue of which it forms a part does not exceed any constitutional or statutory limitation, and that the tax will be duly leveled until the bond and interest thereon have been fully paid and discharged. The bond shall not be valid until it shall have been authenticated by the certificate hereon duly signed by the trustee. The city has designated the bond as a qualified tax-exempt obligation without the meaning of Section 265 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as amended. In witness whereof, the city of Eureka Springs, Arkansas, has caused the bond to be executed by its mayor and city clerk, and its corporate seal to be impressed or imprinted on this bond, all of the dated date shown, all as of the dated date shown above. City of Eureka Springs, Arkansas. Let's see. I need to go to page 8.
Yes.
So I need to read all that like it is. Approved, Robert Barry Mayor, attested, Dan Armstrong, City Clerk. Seal, former trustee certification, trustee's certificate of authentication. The bond is issued under the provisions of the within mentioned authorizing ordinance. Date of authentication. Regions Bank, Little Rock, Arkansas, by the authorized signature. Form of assignment. Assignment for value received, transfer, hereby sells, assigns, and transfers unto the within bond and all rights thereunder, and hereby irrevocably constitutes and appoints as attorney to transfer with the within bond on the books kept for registration thereof with full power of substitution in the premises. Date, then the transfer guaranteed by, and notice, signatures must be guaranteed by a member or participant in the securities transfer agent's medallion program, stamps, or in another signature guarantee program recognized by the trustee. Section 6, the city hereby expressly pledges and appropriates all of the revenues derived by the city from a 1 cent sale and use tax, the tax levied by the city under the authority of the laws of the state and ordinance number 1386 of the city duly adopted on March 20th, 1990. To the payment of the principal of and interest on the bonds when due at maturity or at redemption prior to maturity, to the payment of the fees and expenses of the trustee and other administrative changes, and to the payment of any arbitrage rebate due the United States under Section 148F of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as amended. The code, the city covenants that the tax shall never be repealed or reduced while any of the bonds are outstanding. City further covenants to use due diligence in collecting the tax. Nothing herein shall prohibit the city from increasing the tax from time to time to the extent permitted by law, and no part of the revenues derived from any such increase shall become part of the revenues pledged hereunder. Section 7. A, the city hereby designates Regions Bank with offices in Little Rock, Arkansas, as the bank which shall receive collections of the tax, the pledged revenues from the state treasurer, and the city covenants to file a written designation thereof for the state treasurer prior to the issuance of the Series 2020 bond. The trustee shall deposit all pledged revenues as and when received into a special fund of the city, and the trustee, which is hereby created and designated, Sales and Use Tax Revenue Fund, Series 2020, the Revenue Fund. Monies in the Revenue Fund shall, within 2 business days of receipt, be applied each month in the following order of priority. 1, 1/6 the interest on the bond's next due debt service account in the bond fund hereinafter identified, and 2, 1/12 of the principal of the bond next due debt service account in the bond fund, and 3, the trustee's fund and expenses and other administrative charges next due expense account in the bond fund, and for the amount necessary to pay any arbitrage rebate due under Section 148F of the code, expense account in the bond fund, and 5, the balance shall be transferred to the city for use for lawful purposes within 2 business days of receipt of such monies. The deposits made into the debt service account of the bond fund shall be reduced in order to take into account as a credit, I, interest earnings, II, accrued interest deposited therein from bond proceeds, and III, transfers from funds held in connection with the Series 2012 bonds. Monthly deposits shall be increased as necessary so that there are sufficient funds to meet the first interest payment and first principal payment due on the bond. Section 8A, there is hereby created a special fund of the city in the trustee which is designated Sales and Use Tax Bond Fund, Series 2020, the bond fund, for the purpose of providing funds for the payment of principal of and interest on its bonds as they become due at maturity or at redemption prior to maturity, any arbitrage rebate due to the United States under Section 148F of the Code, and the trustees' fees, expenses, and other administrative charges. There shall be established in the bond fund the following accounts into which money shall be deposited: debt service account and II expense account. Monies in the following bond fund accounts shall be used on each interest payment date in the following order of priority as and when necessary. 1, to pay the interest on the bonds then due, debt service account, and 2, to pay the principal of the bonds then due, debt service account, and 3, to pay the trustees' fees and expenses and other administrative charges then due, expense account. In addition, monies in the expense account and the bond fund shall be used to pay, when due, any arbitrage rebate under Section 148F of the Code. The bond fund shall, except as provided in this section, be depleted once a year, except for a carryover amount not to exceed the greater of I, 1 year's earnings on the bond fund, or II, 1/12 of the annual debt service on the bonds. Any monies in the bond fund shall, except as provided in this section, be spent for one of the above purposes within a 13-month period beginning on the date of deposit, and any amount received from investment of money held in the bond fund will be spent within a 1-year period beginning on the date of receipt. B, when the monies in the bond fund shall be and remain sufficient to pay: 1, the principal of all the bonds then outstanding; 2, interest on the bonds until the next interest payment date; 3, the trustee's fee and expenses and other administrative charges; and 4, all arbitrage rebate payments due to the United States under Section 148F of the Code. There shall be no obligation to make any further payments into the bond fund, and any pledged revenues remaining on the bond fund after the principal of premium, if any, and interest on the bonds have been paid, may be used by the city for any lawful purpose. C, all money in the bond fund shall be used solely for the purpose of paying the principal of and interest on the bonds, any arbitrage rebate due under Section 148F of the Code, and trustees' fees and expenses and other administrative charges as the same becomes due. D, the trustee is authorized and directed to withdraw monies from the bond fund each time from the bond fund from time to time as necessary for paying principal of and interest on the bonds when due at maturity or at redemption prior to maturity, and for making other authorized bond fund expenditures. E, the bond shall be specifically secured by a pledge of the pledged revenues, which pledge in favor of the bonds is hereby irrevocably made according to the terms of this ordinance in the city, and the officers and employees of the city shall execute, perform, and carry out the terms thereof in strict conformity with the provisions of this ordinance. Okay, somebody else can take over tonight.
I'll do it. Section 9, any bonds shall be deemed to be paid within the meaning of this ordinance when payment of the principal of and interest of such bond, whether at maturity or upon redemption as provided herein or otherwise, either I shall have been made or caused to be made in accordance with the terms of II shall have been provided for by the irrevocably depositing with the trustee. In trust and irrevocably set aside exclusively for the payment, L, monies sufficient to make such payment and or to government securities as defined in Section 16 here, of which are directive obligations of the United States of America, provided that such deposit will not cause any of the bonds to be classified as arbitrage bonds within the meanings of the Section 148 of the Code, maturing as to the principal and the interest in such amounts and at such times as will provide sufficient monies to make such payment, and all necessity and proper fees, compensation, and expenses of the trustee with respect to which such deposit is made shall have been paid or payment therefore provided for to the satisfaction of the trustee. On the payment of any bonds within the meanings of this ordinance, the trustee shall hold in trust for the benefit of the owners of such bonds all such monies and/or government securities. When all bonds shall have been paid within the meaning of this ordinance, and if the trustees have been paid as fees and expenses or provisions has been made, therefore, and if all arbitrage rebate due to the United States under Section 148F of the Code has been paid or provided to the satisfaction of the trustee, the trustee shall take all appropriate action to cause, the pledge and lien of this ordinance to be discharged and canceled, and all monies held by it pursuant to this ordinance, and which are not required for the payment of such bonds to be paid over or delivered to at the direction of the city. Section 10, the city covenants that will not issue additional bonds or incur any obligation secured by a lien on or pledge of the pledge revenues except as authorized in this section. The city may issue bonds or incur obligations on the parity of the security for the Section 2020 bond, additions parity bonds under the provisions of this ordinance if pledge revenues for the preceding 12 consecutive months are in excess of 125% of the average annual debt service requirements for the Series 2020 bond, any outstanding additional parity bonds, and the addition of parity bonds proposed to be the issue. The city may also issue additional bonds or incur obligations secured by the pledge of the pledge revenues subordinate to the pledge in favor of the bond. Section 11, the Series 2020 bond shall be callable for payment prior to maturity in accordance with the terms set out in the face of the bonds form set forth in Section 5 of this ordinance. Additional parity bonds shall be the subject of redemption prior to the maturity in accordance with the terms set forth in the ordinance or ordinances authorizing their insurance. The city covenants and agrees to cause to be paid into the bond fund sufficient funds to redeem the Series 2020 bond is in the amounts and on the dates set forth on the forms of the Series 2020 bond. Therefore, in calculating the monthly payments to be deposited into the bond fund, the term principal of bonds next due shall include the principal of the Series 2020 bonds maturing on the next principal payment date and the principal of the Series 2020 bonds, which will be redeemed in accordance with the mandatory sinking fund redemption provision of the Series 2020 bond on the next interest payment date scheduled for such redemption. Section 12, it is hereby and agreed to the city with the owners of the bonds that the city will faithfully and punctually perform all duties with the reference to the tax and the bonds required by the Constitution and laws of the state and by this ordinance, including the collection of the tax as herein specified and covenanted, I can't pronounce that, and the applying of the pledged revenues as herein provided. The trustee shall keep or cause to be kept proper books of accounts and records in which complete and correct entries shall be made of all transactions relating to the pledged revenues, and such books shall be available for inspection by the city and the owner of any of the bonds at reasonable times and under reasonable circumstances. The trustee shall furnish a record to the city on a monthly basis of all receipts, disbursements of the pledged revenues received by the trustee, which monthly report shall commence 1 month following the first month in which the pledged revenues are received by the trustee. Section 14, if there occurs an event of default, as hereinafter defined, the trustee may, and upon the written request of the owner of Series 2020 bond, shall, by proper suit, compel the performance of the duties of the official of the city under the laws of the state. Event of a default shall mean the following. If the city fails to pay the owners of the bond when due any fee or expense incurred in connection with the insurance of the bonds, subject to any limitations thereon. Any representation, warranty, certification, or statement made by the city in connection with the insurance of the bond shall prove to have been incorrect in any material respect when made. III, a final unappealable judgment or order for the payment of money in excess of $5 million payable to the revenues is rendered against the city, and such judgment or order shall continue unsatisfied or unstayed for a period of 60 days. IV, default by the city in the payment of debt service or servicing fees on the bonds. Additional parity bonds are subordinate lien obligations when due or within any applicable grace period. V, the occurrence of any event under any document executed in connection with additional parity bonds are subordinate lien obligation that results in or would entitle the obligee, therefore of a trustee, on behalf of such obligee to pursue any remedies against the city. VI, any material provision of any document delivered in connection with the bond shall at any time for any reason cease to be valid and binding on the city as a result of federal or state legislative or administrative action, or shall be declared in a final unappealable judgment by any court having jurisdiction over the city to be null and void, invalid, or unenforceable, or
Validity?
Yeah. Our enforceability therefore shall be contested by the city. VII, the powers of the city shall be limited in any way, or this ordinance shall be modified or amended in any way that prevents the city from collecting the tax in an amount sufficient to pay Series 2020 bond, any additional parity bonds, or subordinate lien obligations as they become due. VIII, default shall be made by the city in the performance or observance of any other covenants, agreements, or conditions on its part in the documentation delivered in the connection with the bonds, or shall default shall continue for a period of 30 days after written notice thereof to the city by the owners of the bond. The owners shall not have any rights to institute any suit, action, mandamus, or other proceedings in equity or at the law for the protection or the enforcement of any power or right unless such owners previously shall have given to the trustee written notice of the default on the account of which each suit, action, or proceeding is to be taken, and unless the owner shall have made written request of the trustees after the right to exercise such power or right of action as the case may be, shall have occurred, shall have afforded the trustee a reasonable opportunity either to proceed to exercise the power granted to the trustee or to institute such action, suit, proceedings in its name, and unless also there shall have been offered to the trustee reasonable security and indemnity against the costs, expenses, and liabilities to be incurred therein and thereby, and the trustee shall have refused or neglected to comply with such requests within a reasonable time. Such notifications, requests, and offer of indemnity are, at the opinion of the trustee, conditions precedent to the execution of any remedy. No owner shall have the right in any manner whatever, by his or their action to affect, disturb, or prejudice the security of this ordinance, or to enforce any right thereunder except in the manner herein described. All proceedings at law or in equity shall be instituted, had, and maintained in the manner herein described, and for the benefit of the owners of the bonds. Okay, somebody else? Bob?
Go ahead. No remedy conferred upon or reserved to the trustee or to the owners of the bonds is intended to be exclusive of any other remedy or remedies, and every such remedy shall be cumulative and shall be in addition to every other remedy given under this ordinance or by law. Upon the occurrence of an event of default, lender may take any action permitted by law or equity, including without limitation actions to petition a court of competent jurisdiction, to issue a mandamus order to the city, to compel specific performance of the covenants and agreement of the city contained herein. In the event of a default described in 4 above, lender shall have all the rights and powers afforded to other holders of additional parity bonds, if any, with respect to the appointment of a receiver, and so long as the bond shall remain outstanding, the lender's consent to such appointment shall be required. The trustee may, and upon the written request of the owner of the Series 2020 bond shall, waive any default which shall have been remedied before the entry of final judgment or decree in any suit, action, or proceeding instituted under the provisions of this ordinance, or before the completion of the enforcement of any other remedy. But no such waiver shall extend to or affect any other existing or any subsequent default or defaults, or impair any rights or remedies consequent thereon. All rights of action under this ordinance or under the bonds enforceable by the trustee may be enforced by it without the possession of the bonds, and any such suit, action, or proceeding instituted by the trustee shall be brought in its name for the benefit of the owners of the bonds, subject to the provisions of this ordinance. No delay or omission of the trustee or of the owners of the bonds to exercise any right or power accrued upon any default shall impair any such right or power, or shall be construed to be a waiver of any such default or acquiescence therein, and every power and remedy given by this ordinance to the trustee and to the owners of the bonds respectively must be exercised from time to time and as often as may be deemed as expedient. In a proceeding to enforce the provisions of this ordinance, any plaintiff bondholder shall be entitled to recover from the city all costs of such proceeding, including reasonable attorney's fees. Section 15. When the Series 2020 bond has been executed and sealed as herein provided and authenticated by the trustee, it shall be delivered to or at the direction of the lender upon payment of the purchase price. The amount necessary from the purchase price to accomplish the refunding, along with available monies appropriated by Section 21 hereof, as set forth in the delivery instructions from the city to the trustee, the delivery instructions, shall be deposited with the trustee for the owners of the Series 2012 bonds. The expenses of issuing the Series 2020 bond, as set forth in the delivery instructions, shall be paid from the purchase price. The balance of the purchase price, if any, shall be deposited into a special account in the name of the city designated cost of issuance fund, the cost of issuance fund, in the trustee. The monies in the court of issuance fund shall be dispersed solely in payment of the costs of accomplishing the refunding, paying necessary expenses incidental thereto, and paying the expenses of issuing the Series 2020 bond. Disbursements shall be made by the trustee on the basis of requisitions which shall contain at least the following information: the person to whom the payment is being made, the amount of the payment, and the purpose by general classification of the payment. Each requisition must be signed by the mayor. The trustee shall be required to keep accurate records as to all payments made from the cost of issuance fund. When all required expenses have been paid and expenditures made from the cost of issuance fund for and in connection with the accomplishment of the refunding and the issuance of the Series 2020 bond, this fact shall, if there are monies on hand in the cost of issuance fund, be evidenced by a certificate signed by the mayor, which certificate shall state, among other things, that all obligations payable from the cost of issuance fund have been discharged. A copy of the certificate shall be filed with the trustee, and upon receipt thereof, the trustee shall deposit any remaining balance into the debt service account in the bond fund. Notwithstanding the above, any monies remaining in the cost of issuance fund on February 1, 2021 shall be transferred into the debt service account in the bond fund. Section 16. A. Monies held for the credit of the reserve fund, the bond fund, and the cost of issuance fund shall be invested and reinvested pursuant to the written direction of the city in 1. Direct or fully guaranteed obligations of the United States of America, including such securities issued or held in book entry form on the books of the Department of the Treasury of the United States of America, Government Securities, to direct obligations of an agency, instrumentally or government-sponsored enterprise created by an act of the United States Congress and authorized to issue securities or evidence of indebtedness regarding of whether the securities or evidence of indebtedness are guaranteed for repayment by the United States government. 3, in demand deposits or certificates of deposit of banks, including the trustee, which are insured by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, or if in excess of insurance coverage, collateralized by government securities or other securities authorized by state law to secure public deposits, or 4, money market funds invested exclusively in government securities and/or the obligations described in 2 above at the option of such holder not later than the date or dates when the monies will be required for payment of the principal of and interest on the bonds when due. B, obligations so purchased as an investment of monies in any fund shall be deemed at all times to be a part of such fund and in the interest accruing thereon, and any profit realized from such investments shall be credited to such fund, and any loss resulting from such investment shall be charged to such fund. C, money so invested in government securities or in certificates of deposits of banks to the extent insured by the FDIC need not be secured by the trustee or by the depository bank. D, all investments and deposits shall have a par value or market value when less than par, exclusive of accrued interest at all times at least equal to the amount of money credited to such funds, and shall be made in such a manner that the money required to be expended from any fund will be available at the proper time or times. E, investments of monies in all funds shall be valued in terms of current market value as of the last day of each year, except that direct obligations of the United States, state and local government series, in book entry form shall be continuously valued at par or face principal amount. Section 17. In the event the office of mayor, city clerk, or city treasurer shall be abolished, or any 2 or more of such offices shall be merged or consolidated, or in the event the duties of a particular office shall be transferred to another office or offices, or in the event of a vacancy in any such office by reason of death, resignation, removal from office or otherwise, or the event any such officer shall become incapable of performing the duties of his or her office by reason of sickness, absence from the city or otherwise, all powers conferred and all obligations and duties imposed upon such office or officer shall be performed by the office or officers succeeding to the principal functions thereof, or by the office or officer upon whom such powers, obligations, and duties shall be imposed by law. Section 18. Regions Bank with officers in Little Rock, Arkansas is hereby appointed as trustee and paying agent pursuant to this ordinance. The trustee shall be responsible for the exercise of good faith and reasonable prudence in the execution of its trust. The recitals in this ordinance and in the bonds are the recitals of the city and not of the trustee. The trustee shall not be required to take any action as trustee unless it shall have been requested to do so in writing by the owners of not less than 10% in principal amount of bonds then outstanding, and shall have been offered reasonable security and indemnity against the costs, expenses, and liabilities to be incurred therein or thereby. The trustee may resign by giving 60 days notice in writing to the city clerk and to the owners of the bonds, and the majority in principal amount of the owners of the outstanding bonds or the city, so long as it is not in default under this ordinance at any time with or without cause, and may remove the trustee. In the event of a vacancy in the office of trustee, the city shall appoint a new trustee, such appointment to be evidenced by a written instrument or instruments filed with the city clerk. The new trustee shall be a bank or a trust company duly authorized to exercise trust powers and subject to examination by federal or state authority, having a reported capital and surplus of not less than $10 million. The trustee and any successor trustee shall file a written acceptance and agreement to execute the trust imposed upon it by this ordinance, but only upon the terms and conditions set forth in this ordinance and subject to the provisions of this ordinance, to all of which the respective owners of the bonds agree. Such written acceptance shall be filed with the city clerk, and a copy thereof shall be placed in the bond transcript. Any successor trustee shall have all the powers herein granted to the original trustee. The trustee's resignation shall take effect upon the acceptance of the trust by the successor trustee. Section 19, the terms of this ordinance shall constitute a contract between the city and the owners of the bonds, and no variation or change in the undertaking herein set forth shall be made while any of the bonds are outstanding, except as hereafter set forth in subsections B and C. B, the trustee may consent to any variation or change in this ordinance that the trustee determines is not to the material prejudice of the owners of the bonds in connection with the issuance of additional parity bonds, or in order to cure any ambiguity, defect, or omission in this ordinance, or any amendment hereto, without the consent of the owners of the outstanding bonds. C, the owners of not less than 75% in aggregate principal amount of the bonds then outstanding shall have the right, from time to time, anything contained in this ordinance to the contrary notwithstanding, to consent to and approve the adoption by the city of such ordinance, supplemental hereto, as shall be necessary or desirable for the purpose of modifying, altering, amending, adding to, or rescinding in any particular any of the terms or provisions contained in this ordinance or in any supplemental ordinance, provided, however, that nothing contained in this section shall permit to be construed as permitting, 1, an extension of the maturity of the principal of or interest on any bond, or 2, a reduction in the principal amount of any bond or the rate of interest thereon, or 3, the creation of a pledge of the pledged revenue superior to the pledge created by this ordinance, or 4, a privilege or priority of any bond or bonds over any other bond or bonds, or 5, a reduction in the aggregate principal amount of the bonds required for consent to such supplemental ordinance. Section 20, the Series 2020 bond is hereby designated as a qualified tax-exempt obligation within the meaning of Section 265 of the Internal Revenue Code of 1986 as amended, the code. The city represents that the aggregate principal amount of its qualified tax-exempt obligations, excluding private activity bonds within the meaning of Section 141 of the code, which are not qualified 501c3 bonds within the meaning of Section 145 of the code, including those of its subordinate entities issued in calendar year 2020, are not reasonably anticipated to exceed $10 million. B, the city covenants that it will take no action which would cause the Series 2020 bond to be federally guaranteed within the meaning of Section 149B of the code. The city further covenants that it will submit to the Secretary of the Treasury of the United States not later than the 15th day of the second calendar month after the close of the calendar quarter in which the Series 2020 bond is issued, a statement concerning the Series 2020 bond, which contains the information required by Section 149E of the code. C, the city represents that it has not used or permitted the use of and covenants that it will not use or permit the use of the improvements to be refinanced by the Series 2020 bond or the proceeds of the Series 2020 bond in such manner as to cause the Series 2020 bond to be a private activity bond within the meaning of Section 141 of the code. In this regard, the city covenants that, 1, it will not use directly or indirectly the proceeds of the Series 2020 bond to make or finance loans to any person, and 2, that while the Series 2020 bond is outstanding, the improvements to be refinanced by the Series 2020 bond will only be used by persons on a basis as members of the general public. D, the city shall pay any arbitrage rebate due to the United States Treasury under Section 148 of the Code for monies in the bond fund. E, the city covenants that it will not reimburse itself from the Series 2020 bond proceeds for any cost paid prior to the date the Series 2020 bond is issued, except in compliance with the United States Treasury Regulation Number 1.150-2. Section 21, all monies in the bond fund, including the debt service reserve account therein, held for the Series 2012 bond, shall be used as necessary to accomplish the refunding. The balance, if any, shall be deposited into the debt service account of the bond fund. Section 22, the disclosure agreement, in substantially the form submitted to this meeting, is approved, and the mayor is hereby authorized and directed to execute and deliver the disclosure agreement on behalf of the city. The mayor is authorized and directed to take all action required on the part of the city to fulfill the city's obligation under the disclosure agreement. Any legal fees and other administrative costs incurred by the city in connection with the disclosure agreement, except audit fees, shall be considered administrative costs that may be payable from monies in the bond fund herein after identified. Following adoption, this ordinance shall be posted in the following public places in the city: City Hall, Tad's One Stop, Eureka's Oriental Market, Hart's Family Center, and Dutch's Quick Check. Section 24, the provisions of this ordinance are separable, and in the event that any section or part thereof shall be held to be invalid, such invalidity shall not affect the remainder of this ordinance. Section 25, all ordinances and resolutions and parts thereof in conflict herewith are hereby repealed to the extent of such conflict. And since 26 is the emergency clause, I'm going to pause.
I'd like to make a motion to suspend the rules and read ordinance 2295 by,
We got to vote on this. Make a motion to approve ordinance on first reading.
okay, I'm sorry. I make a motion to approve ordinance 2295 on its first reading.
Second.
Mr. Green made a motion to approve ordinance 2295 on its first reading. It's seconded by Mr. McClung. Any further comments? All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Mayor, over suspending the rules, can we do a roll call vote, please?
We will.
Oh, we will.
Okay. Now,
Yes, sir.
I'll make the motion to suspend the rules and read ordinance 2295 by title only on its second reading.
Second.
Okay. Motion to suspend the rules by Ms. Green, second by Ms. Harmon.
Mr. McClung?
Yeah.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Snyder?
Yes,
Ms. Harmon?
Yes.
6-0. Ordinance number 2295, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a sales and use tax refunding bond for the purpose of refinancing the cost of capital improvements, pledging a 1% sales and use tax to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds, describing other matters relating thereto, and declaring an emergency.
Mr. Thomas?
Move to approve ordinance number 2295 on its second reading.
Second.
Any further discussion?
This is okay.
All those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That's so moved.
Mayor, I'm sorry, can we get a roll call on all of the questions for the bond limit, please?
Okay. Roll call.
Sure. Ms. Schneider?
Yes.
Ms. Harmon?
Yes.
Mr. McClung?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
6-0. Okay, so that
Mr. Green?
Okay. I'll make a motion to suspend the rules and read ordinance 2295 on its third reading by title only.
I'll second.
Motion by Ms. Green, second by Mr. Meyer. Any further discussion? Roll call.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Schneider?
Couldn't hear what?
Is it okay to suspend the rules and read the ordinance by?
yes.
Okay. Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
Mr. McClung?
Yes.
Ms. Harmon?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
6-0. Ordinance number 2295, an ordinance authorizing the issuance of a sales and use tax refunding bond for the purpose of refinancing the cost of capital improvements, pledging a 1% sales and use tax to pay the principal of and interest on the bonds, prescribing other matters relating thereto, and declaring an emergency.
I'll make a motion to approve ordinance 2295 on its third reading.
Second.
Okay, motion by Ms. Green to approve ordinance 55 on its third reading, second by Mr. McClung. A roll call.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Mr. McClung?
Yes.
Ms. Schneider?
Ms. Snyder?
Thank you. Ms. Green?
Yes.
Ms. Harmon?
Yes.
Mr. Meyer?
Yes.
6-0.
Can I get a motion to read the emergency clause?
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. McClung to read the emergency clause, and second by Ms. Green. Any discussion?
Mr. Meyer? Read the emergency clause.
Yes.
Are you in favor?
Yes.
Ms. Green?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
Ms. Schneider?
Yes.
Mr. McClung?
Yes.
Ms. Harmon?
Yes.
6-0. Got it. Section 26, it is hereby ascertained and declared that the refunding must be accomplished as soon as possible in order to lower the interest cost on obligations payable from the tax. Refunding cannot be accomplished without the issuance of the Series 2020 bond, and therefore it is declared that an emergency exists, and this ordinance being necessary for the preservation of the public peace, health, and safety, it shall be in force and take effect immediately upon and after its passage.
Thank you. Thank you all for preparing this and coming to us for it. Next item of business is budget discussion. Motion to discuss?
Second.
All right. Mr. Thomas?
Council discussed the budget during the workshop before the meeting, and at this time, I guess I'd like to make a motion that to have the mayor develop a budget showing a 35% reduction over existing balances as of March 31st, 2020.
I'll second that.
Discussion? All right, all those in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, so moved. Brings us to agenda setting. Anyone at this time? All right, council,
Hey,
yes. All right, speak up.
okay. I'd like to add to the next agenda a discussion of the setup of temporary committees.
The what?
Would you repeat that again, Mickey?
I'd like to add to the agenda a discussion of the setup of temporary committees.
Got it?
Okay, Mickey, can you explain that?
No,
Yeah.
no.
No discussion, it's just on the agenda. All right,
Okay, thank you.
anybody else?
Here's a question.
Ms. Harmon?
Did we take off the first quarter 2020 financial for the ACA?
Nope.
No.
Can't hear.
We just missed it.
Did we dismiss it?
We sure did, we can go right back to it, though. That's no problem.
You want to finish the agenda portion?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and finish the agenda portion. Anybody have anything else on the agenda? All right, I'm sorry, we did miss discussion of the first quarter 2020 financial report. Madam Clerk?
Okay. Anybody who wants to see this happy news, because it's a treasure. This is the payroll, receipts for the first quarter, the check register, and the debt service and long-term liabilities is in the last monthly report that you received. Did not add it to this packet, but that will be easy to do for those who come in and look at it.
Ms. Harmon?
I just, sorry, I didn't mean to miss this, but can we just add to the agenda for next meeting, the 2020 budget again?
Second.
Okay. Anything else? Ms. Harmon, you got any comments?
I do not.
Mr. Meyer?
Facing some tough times.
We'll make it.
So we're facing some tough times, but we're gonna make it.
Ms. Snyder, you have any comments?
Yes, I'd like to wish Bob and Connie Howell good luck. Let them know that they are in our prayers and our thoughts. I'd also like to wish my husband a happy 74th birthday to old time. That's it.
Mr. McClung?
I'm ready to go home.
Ms. Green?
This was really hard today. I'm seeing what, I'd like to just say is I'm seeing a real optimism and the businesses coming up with new ideas on how to face this and how to start their businesses up. And that's what I like about Eureka is we do persevere and we have a lot of initiative. And so I'm optimistic.
Mr. Thomas?
I want some of your meds.
Well, come over.
No, I have no comment.
Well, obviously, we don't have any events going on in the city right now, but I am excited to see the city starting to open back up. I know that's good news and bad news. We're going to start seeing a lot of people in town. Want to make sure that all of our citizens, please be safe, wear your mask. Please stay, exhibit social distances and wash your hands and be aware of what you're doing. We will be seeing a lot of new people come in, and I think our town is going to be picking up, so I'm excited to finally see this, and hopefully we will continue on without having any major spikes. So, other than that, get a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so moved. Thank you all.
Whoever invented that suspend the rules thing is my favorite. It's your favorite, so whoever invented that suspend the rules. After I read that thing 3 times, I never even survived.